This is not the Whole Foods of energy, nice but pricey. This is the Costco of power. Cheap, available in bulk, on the shelf, ready to go. If we can get that message through, then we win.
I'm Dr. Leah Stokes.
And I'm Dr. Captain Wilkinson. Today on A Matter of Degrees, we have got a very special interview for y'all.
Yes, we're going right back to the beginning of our podcast with Bill McKibben, who was the first guest on our show. And he's really the original, the OG climate activist.
As Bill says in this interview, he wrote a book about climate change way back in the 80s. It was the first one, and would that we had done a better job of listening and acting.
So by now, Bill has written a lot of books. I think he's up to 20, and his most recent one is called Here Comes the Sun, A Last Chance for the Climate and a Fresh Chance for Civilization. It came out on August 19th, and it's really about the bright future ahead of us.
Bill is also organizing SunDay. This is the first national day of action to demand large-scale deployment of clean energy. That clean energy is already here, it's in hand, it's ready to go big, and it's an invitation for all of us to join in on SunDay and beyond to make that happen.
So SunDay is kind of like Earth Day. It's taking place on September 21st. If you want to get involved, you can go to SunDay.earth. And you're going to hear a lot more about it from Bill McKibben himself in this interview.
Solar, it's something like magic. Would you just start by telling us how the technology actually works and why it's so incredible?
Yeah, it is kind of like magic. And it's a magic that we didn't possess until 1954, when at Bell Labs in New Jersey, the first solar cell was introduced. Basically, what it allows us to do is take the energy that's being produced in millions of nuclear reactions going on in the sun, all that conversion of hydrogen into helium, and take it and turn it directly into electricity through this solar cell. Now, of course, the magic at first came at a very stiff price. This was the most expensive energy on Earth. The only thing you could use it for really was satellites, because there wasn't much other choice. But over time, and with a great assist from both activists and engineers, its price has come steadily down. And now all of a sudden, and this is the magic part really, it's the cheapest form of energy on Earth. We live on a planet where the most inexpensive way to produce the power that we need is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. And that's only happened in the last 3 or 4 years, but it's an epochal moment in our history as a species. It means that we can leave behind our old and troubled magic, combustion, which we've been using for 700,000 years, but no longer really need, and instead pretty much directly translate the power of the sun, which already hospitably provides us with light and with warmth and with photosynthesis, and now is willing to give us all the direct energy we could ever need. So all in all, remarkable change for our species. As big, I think, as learning to burn fossil fuel in the first place was 200 years ago.
If that was the power source of the Industrial Revolution, what should this era be called?
That's a good question. We're having this big Sun Day coming up in September to celebrate this. We've said, every day is Earth Day. Every day is Sunday. That's the point. The sun unfailingly rises above the horizon. It's the most charismatic object in our universe, even if it's the one that we can't look at directly. It's the single most important thing in our lives, our physical lives, and now it can take on this even bigger dimension.
And 70 years on from the Bell Labs breakthroughs, what's the current state of solar energy today in the US, but also globally?
It's the fastest growing energy source in the world. In fact, the fastest growing energy source in the history of the world. And it's exploding. It took us all the years from 1954 to 2022 to get the first terawatt installed. The second terawatt came by 2024. The third will be by the end of this year. The growth is explosive. We don't see it necessarily quite as much because so much of it is happening in China. In May, the Chinese were installing 3 gigawatts of solar, the equivalent of 3 coal-fired power plants. They're installing that much every day in terms of solar panels. But we can sense it in this country too. California is the best example. California has passed some kind of tipping point in the last year or so. Now, most days, California produces more than 100% of its electricity from renewables for long stretches of the day, which means that at night when the sun goes down, often the biggest source of supply to the grid in California is batteries that have been soaking up excess sunshine all afternoon. But the real bottom line there is California is using 44% less natural gas to produce electricity this summer than it did 2 years ago. That's a big number. I've been working on climate change for 4 decades. I wrote the first book about it back in the 1980s. That's the most optimistic statistic I've come across in that time, that the 4th largest economy in the world, California, has managed in 2 years to cut the amount of natural gas that it's using to produce electricity almost in half, gives you a sense of how quickly it's now possible to move. I will add that if I know that statistic, then Exxon and Chevron know it too. And that explains, I think, more than anything else, why they've spent unprecedented amounts of money gaming our political system to try desperately to slow down this transition before it gets any more ahead of steam.
Shaking in their oily little boots, if you will.
Well, in part because they're getting to watch it close up. California is no longer the fastest growing renewable energy state in the country. That distinction belongs to Texas, which is also the hydrocarbon hub of the entire world. The oil industry tried to put the brakes on Texas renewables this spring in the legislature. They had a bunch of proposed laws, including one that was basically just DEI for natural gas. It said that if you put up 5 megawatts of solar, you had to put up 5 megawatts of natural gas too. People from around Texas, rural Texas, appeared in Austin saying, do not do this. This is how we fund our school system now. This is what pays for the old folks' home in our rural county. And the legislature backed off. Didn't do those things. Washington's obviously done them, and that'll cause a lot of damage. But to get back to your original question, it's not slowing the pace in the rest of the world. If anything, that pace is picking up and will pick up as people begin to realize in countries around the world that the last country they want to depend on for energy exports is the now utterly fickle and bizarre United States. If you're getting your LNG from us, you're just setting yourself up for Donald Trump to extort something out of you. So better be building your solar farms as fast as you can.
Absolutely. Pardon the pun, but you can sort of see these bright spots of solar that are emerging around the planet. And if the bright spots become not spots, but sort of just brightness everywhere, what does our society begin to look like if it is running on the sun and not on fossil fuels?
Well, that's a very good question. So in the first place, yes, you really can see those bright spots emerging. You can map China's trade routes and influence by where solar panels are now popping up in huge quantities. Africa, Pakistan, places like that. But as this spreads across the world, look, the reason that we have to do it is because if we don't, we're going to melt the planet, and that would be unfortunate.
That's an understatement, Bill. But okay.
As a pretty committed resident of Earth.
But as we do it, we're going to discover lots of other useful things too. So combustion is not only wrecking the climate, it kills 9 million people on this planet a year, about 1 death in 5, people who have to breathe the byproducts of that fossil fuel combustion. So that'd be nice to not do that. There are many drivers of the grotesque inequality that marks our world now. But One of the original ones, and one of the most important, maybe the most important, is the fact that we run our world at the moment on a resource, fossil fuel, that's only available in a few scattered places. The people who control those places end up with way too much power. I mean, in our country, it was the Koch brothers, our biggest oil and gas barons, and they used their winnings to systematically degrade our democracy over decades. In Russia, in Europe, it's Vladimir Putin, who's using his bonanza to launch land wars in Europe in the 21st century. We are capable now quickly of building a world that runs on resources that are available everywhere to everyone, and by their nature can't really be hoarded or held in reserve. Even human beings are going to have a hard time figuring out how to fight wars over sunshine. So I think the world on the other side of this is not just a little cooler than it would otherwise be, but a little cooler.
I think basically what Bill just said is that it's not the oligarchy, it's the oiligarchy that controls the world, these petro dictators. Good times. So if we just get rid of the oil, we get rid of the oiligarchy, I guess so.
I mean, it's not like liberation absolutely follows. You know, the Chinese managed to combine repression and solar power in their own particular ways and things, but it gives us a chance, you know. It's a different world.
And all that carbon gets to avoid disinterment and just hang out below ground. So another beneficiary.
down there where the good Lord stored it safely away.
Down in some kind of underground speakeasy, you know what I mean?
We're moving to energy from heaven, not from hell. And that's a beautiful thing to contemplate.
So, Bill, of course, SunDay is not just about solar panels, right? The cool thing is that they can power so much more of our lives with electric vehicles and heat pumps, and we can even store the sun in batteries. And so when you talk about Here Comes the Sun or the big event coming up in September, SunDay, you're not just talking about solar panels, right? You're talking about all the clean electric machines we can use.
People are busily planning EV parades, and lots of people will be opening their homes to their neighbors to show them how their heat pumps work, to kind of demystify all of this. There's going to be people cooking big feasts for the community on induction cooktops powered straight off the solar panel or on solar cookers straight up. One of the things I'm looking forward to are all the people who are doing cool things on e-bikes. We talk about EVs all the time, and they're great, but I have a feeling that the e-bike may turn out to be the even more remarkable invention of our time, that we've somehow come up with a bike that doesn't have hills. It is a just spectacular innovation, and you can run.
I've never understood why cyclists intentionally climb hills. I couldn't agree more. I see these people in Santa Barbara doing the Lance Armstrong route, and I'm like, why? Why not have an e-bike? I agree.
Well, there's a certain amount of Puritan in me that enjoys the occasion, but it's just a wonderful idea that you can be out there, and the energy cost. I mean, you can get. I think the last I saw was a penny's worth of electricity to get you about 5 miles on a standard e-bike. The numbers are just amazing.
Well, you will be surprised to hear that I stayed up late last night reading an article about how the e-bike revolution is affecting young people in America, because it isn't just good for the planet, it's also really good for kids' mental health. In my community, I see people out there all the time in these sort of like tween e-bike gangs roving around the city, and it's getting them off their phones, it's getting them into the world outside with their friends. It's really helping people, I think, have a different way to be a young person, have independence, have fun, especially with how much the phones have impacted our lives. So I think e-bikes are really great for mental health too, and especially for young people.
That fits with everything that I've been seeing too. We've been very committed to the idea that we lived in the best of all possible worlds, and people get very angry when you suggest changing. But the truth is that all these things we're talking about are better than the things that they replace. Like the EV is just a better car on any grounds. I mean, if what you like to do is go really fast, then it's better for that too, The heat pump is a better alternative than the furnace. It delivers both heat and cold and does it elegantly and inexpensively. I'm the cook in our house, so the induction cooktop is a great I can't tell you how it works.
Magnets, magic, I believe, yeah.
It boils water twice as fast as the open campfire in your kitchen, with the small side benefit of not giving your kids asthma along the way. So we're talking about a world that in all these ways works better. And that's why it's fun to be talking about SunDay, because everything else in our world is going straight to hell right at the moment. We're governed by idiots, and we're watching cruelty on a just incredible scale play out in so many ways and things. But I think that's why, as we're going into SunDay, people are responding to the idea that in the midst of a lot of big bad things happening, that there's one big good thing happening on planet Earth right now.
Well, in our last episode, we talked about some of the bad things, which is that these federal credits that are helping people get solar on their roof and EVs in their driveway and heat pumps in their home, they're going to go away in the next few months. And so this is also a big opportunity for people to act now, to move fast and show their neighbors what it's like to have solar panels, open up their homes. That's really what SunDay's all about. But can you talk about what you think some of the impacts are going to be of these expiring credits and how important it is for people to go get that heat pump before the end of the year?
Yep, you got till New Year's Eve to get this stuff done. Get at it, and you'll get the credit that should have been there for a decade. So people are going to have to rush, and that's not good. But it is one of the things that we're doing at SunDay, is spreading that word and helping people make the leap right now. The other thing we're doing, one of the other things we're doing, is trying at the state and local level, where we can still work politically, to change some of the rules around especially permitting, so that going forward we'll still have a solar industry of some kind. In Australia, it costs a third what it does in this country to put solar on your roof. So they've almost completely done away with subsidies in Australia. They don't need them anymore because they've managed to make the process cheap enough that everybody's doing it. As you know, in this country, one factor there is the fact that we have 10,000 different jurisdictions, each with their own set of rules that make it cumbersome to get the approvals necessary to do this stuff. It takes months and months sometimes. Whereas literally in Australia or much of the EU, you can make a phone call on Monday, and by Friday that solar system is up on your roof, pouring power into the grid or into your batteries. So we're going to have to, given that we're not going to have power in Washington, at least for the next few years, we're going to have to do a lot of things at the state and local level too now.
Yeah, there's been this huge revolution in Germany. Obviously, Germany was really important in the global diffusion of solar. But these days, what they're really known for is putting up these balcony solar arrays, right? That are just kind of DIY, stick it outside, get some solar. And you can think about the same thing for carports. Like you could have an EV underneath a solar carport, and these should be really easy to put up. But in the United States, as you talked about, there's a lot of red tape. There's a real patchwork of approvals. So what can people do in the SunDay network to help change that and make progress still happen even with Trump in Washington?
That's one of the reasons that we're mobilizing at SunDay and at Third Act, where I do a lot of my organizing with old people like me. We've got tens of thousands of volunteers working with their state legislators and their local state public utility commissions and their local city halls to change these rules. And it's not an impossible task. The balcony solar story is a beautiful one. There's 1.5 million Germans who hang these things from the railings of their apartment. The only place in America where it's legal, and this is as of 2 months ago, is that progressive bastion, Utah, where the state legislature, goaded on by a libertarian state senator, unanimously passed a rule saying, yeah, let Utahns hook these things up. On rooftop solar stuff, there are now 3 states, California, Maryland, and most recently New Jersey, that have mandated the use of this solar app for automated permitting for solar contractors, which speeds up the process quite a bit, or can. So there are things that we can and are pushing to get done, but it's going to take political organizing to do it. And organizing and activism have always gone hand in hand with progress here. You were talking about Germany, and it really is the powerful story. In the late 1990s, early 2000s, the Green Party held the balance of power in Germany's parliamentary system, and they used that leverage to demand the first of these feed-in tariffs. Germany paid a lot of money because solar panels were expensive in those days. And that money was the demand that allowed the Chinese to get good at building these things inexpensively. So it was a real combination of activism and engineering that got us where we needed to go, and now we need that again.
There's so many dimensions to this whole story of solar and to what it will take to turn bright spots into brightness everywhere. And it's policy, it's tech, it's science, it's finance, it's organizing, but it's also culture and even spiritual aspects as well. And I love your description about the sun as the single most powerful, charismatic object in the natural world, with all respect to the moon, who just hangs out and reflects back the sun, which is actually a pretty cool gig, you know what I mean? But would you speak a little bit to, I don't know, a powerful anecdote or two about how sun has manifested in kind of cultural mythologies or appreciations?
We could start ancient or modern. I called this new book of mine, I borrowed the title from George Harrison. As it turns out, Here Comes the Sun is by far the most streamed song in the Beatles' massive catalog. Not a Lennon and McCartney tune, a George Harrison one. And I think it's because of its gentle and optimistic nature. As far as we can go back in human culture, humans have been tracking the way the sun moves across the horizon, building things like Stonehenge that serve as solar calendars of one kind or another. We've always understood at the deepest level the importance, even to our mood. There isn't a human being who doesn't grin when the sun comes out from behind the clouds and hits their shoulders. The spring before last in Vermont, the eclipse that came across the country had a long period of totality in Vermont, and so people crowded into the state. It was our biggest traffic jams ever, but very congenial traffic jams because everyone was in a good mood. I watched it from the quad at Middlebury College, where I teach some, and there were 1,500 students out there, and they put down their phones and watched this incredible spectacle. I'm particularly taken by the fact that St. Francis of Assisi wrote that beautiful canticle poem that begins with an ode to brother sun. And it was the first words of that, Laudato Si', that his namesake, Pope Francis, used as the title for really the most important piece of writing this century about the world and us in it. His incredible 2015 encyclical on climate change. And now very moved by the fact that his successor, Leo, the first American pope, said last week that the Vatican will officially become the first fully solar-powered nation-state in the world. They've broken ground on a large solar farm just outside of Rome that will supply enough power for the Vatican, and apparently quite a bit left over for the community. And they're going to intersperse the rows of solar panels with rows of crops of various kinds. That movement towards what we're calling clumsily agrovoltaics is one of the most beautiful parts of this whole thing. In a world that's overheating, shade is a precious commodity now too.
Even for animals, cows and chickens and goats and everybody.
Leah, the one thing apparently that we're not supposed to put in a solar farm is a goat. They eat the cables and they're jumping up on the panels. So
Okay, I take back the goats.
the goats are the
Sheep.
only.
You gotta stick with the grounded animals, Leah.
But check this out. The big trial in France last year found that you could grow and you could increase grape yield 60% across a number of varieties if you were growing them in a solar field. So tell your neighbors up there in Napa and Sonoma, there's no end to the beauty that comes with all of this. And truthfully, I think that people are going to need to and will develop a slightly new aesthetic. I really think that a windmill is one of the most beautiful things on the planet. I can sit and watch them on the horizon all day. And I think we'll need to develop that new aesthetic. At the moment, people consider a cornfield to be a kind of natural thing. But in fact, a cornfield in our country is just a biological desert. They're inefficient solar collectors that you have to pour nitrogen and phosphorus on to make them work, and then you have to spray them with pesticides and herbicides. If we can take some of that land, half of our corn crop just grows for growing gasoline anyway, and use it instead for solar farms with farms in between the rows. I mean, that's a beautiful vision. As I said before, the reason that we have to do this is because we're in a deep climate crisis. Yeah. But the reason that we get to enjoy it along the way is that it brings so many other things. We've talked about all the good parts here. The hard part here is that we have to do it fast. And there are days when I know a little more climate science than I should. And the speed with which we're managing to wreck the Earth is roughly equivalent to the speed with which we're managing to put up solar panels. And I don't know whether we can make those lines cross or not. That's the challenge, to do this beautiful thing faster than mere economics will drive us to do it.
We're sort of neck and neck down the home stretch is kind of what it feels like.
There is a Hollywood kind of script playing out here. It was June 2023 was the month that we had this sudden spike in temperatures. What scientists
hottest 3 days in a row, yeah.
3 days since the last 125,000 years. And every month since then has been at this same aggressively elevated temperature. But June 2023 was also the same month for the first time humans were putting up a gigawatt's worth of solar a day. So these things are happening at exactly the same time.
Yeah, but I would prefer not to be living in the Hollywood script version. There's too much suspense and drama. I don't know if we're going to win, if it's going to be a tragedy or a comedy. I think I just would like a boring one.
It's fine for the films, but it's not really great for real life, I'll say. But here we are.
We're cutting it a little close, but I got to say, I have to restrain myself on occasion from saying, oh, if only you listened to me when. We actually had good warning about all of this a long time ago.
Almost, really Leah's and my entire lifetimes. I'm a little bit older than Leah, but there's been decades to get after this. I may just be like wildly mixing metaphors here, Bill, but when we think about kind of what can add wind into the sails of moving this forward faster, it strikes me that there are the things like the exponential improvements in the economics of this technology, but also the intangibles. Like, how do we actually get our neighbors across the country to understand that this isn't just like, oh, it's great, it's like Blockbuster to Netflix, it's just better. Like, it's actually highly aligned with American values of freedom and possibility. And yet...
So this is actually, Catherine, one of the really interesting things here. When we do polling about solar power, it polls remarkably well across ideological and partisan lines. One of the very few things, solar power and opposition to pedophiles seem to be the two things that you find polling across partisan divisions these days. And both of those are good news, I think that sometimes they're for very different reasons. I've lived all my life in rural America, sort of evenly split between red America and more purple America. Yeah. So I have a lot of conservative neighbors. I've lived on dirt roads my whole life. And I think for many of the conservative friends, solar panels are a way to really make your house your castle. You don't have to depend on anyone anymore. It really is yours. And that's a powerful notion for a lot of people. I know a number of people who went and bought that Ford F-150 Lightning, in part the EV truck, in part because They loved the idea that they could run their house off it for a week if they needed to. And then there's, liberals who, like me, who think that it's cool that we're networking the groovy power of the sun, preserve our climate, and light up our lives. We can work across those kind of divisions. That's what that Utah story, to me, demonstrates. And God knows we need one or two things that we actually can work on. But it's much easier if people have had a neighbor who puts up solar panels. It's much easier to bring yourself to do it. And in fact, I just saw the data from this project in the UK where people with heat pumps in their homes were systematically recruited to open their homes for their neighbors to come visit. And it turns out that was dramatically increasing the uptake in heat pump installation. So yeah, it's different, and so it takes a little while to get people comfortable.
Yeah, so much of these technologies are spread through networks. That's what the research keeps showing. And interestingly, some of my colleagues at UC Santa Barbara use the Google solar data where you can see all the rooftops with solar, and they actually figured out, okay, who lives in those houses, what's their partisanship, and Republicans are as likely as Democrats to put solar on their roofs. So this really is a bipartisan thing. It's not just our propaganda. The money is coming from Republican people to put solar on the roofs as much as Democrats.
Leah, that's a great statistic. I talked with all these people at Conservatives for Clean Energy in the Southeast this spring as we were getting SunDay going, and it was completely fascinating to talk with them. They actually did a real service in persuading the governor of Florida not to put the kibosh on rooftop solar over the last couple of years. And now the Sunshine State is actually installing panels at a reasonable rate.
For the first time ever, yeah.
I'm going to pivot us just slightly, Bill, because I think we'd be remiss not to ask you about this, because I know you've been thinking deeply about the not wholly clean parts of clean energy, specifically around mining, and how we should think about that in the context of the entirety of our energy system.
Absolutely. I mean, there is no free lunch, but there are cheaper and more expensive lunches. And in this case, you have to go mine some stuff to make this work. You need some lithium, you need some cobalt, you need some copper, you need stuff. But when you start thinking about it, you begin to quickly sense why it's a different scale of mining than we're used to now. If you go mine some lithium, you put it in a battery and it does its job for 25 years. And when the battery begins to degrade, now we can recycle it and get the lithium back out and start over again. When you go mine some coal, you set it on fire. And so you have to go mine some more the next day. There's a study, I think, last fall from the Rocky Mountain Institute estimating that the total volume of minerals we need for this transition over the next couple of decades is equivalent to the volume of coal we mined last year. Obviously, we should do it as sensitively as we can, and people should work hard to make that happen. But the dematerialization that comes with this transition is real. About 40% of all the ship traffic on planet Earth just is carrying coal and oil and gas back and forth across the oceans. It's one of the reasons why I always giggle when the anti-wind forces try to pretend that their concern is the health of whales on our planet.
Right.
If we could reduce the amount of ship traffic in half, every whale on Earth would stand on its tail and spout its thanks. Another way of saying this is, if you take a shipload of coal and a shipload of solar panels, the shipload of solar panels in its lifetime will produce about 500 times as much energy. We're talking about a dramatic paradigm shift here.
And from an industry where the only recycling is happening via photosynthesis to one where the industry itself can actually increasingly create circularity. I just saw exciting news about this summer. We have the largest solar panel manufacturing operations in Northwest Georgia.
In Marjorie Taylor Greene's district, of all places.
In her district, no less. We've got complexity. There's a reason Flannery O'Connor was writing about the South. You know what I mean, Bill? But now they've got a big recycling effort that is co-located with that plant, right? And again, there's a lot more to do, but we've got bright spots even on those aspects.
Even more remarkable than that, because since we're still on this profound learning curve with these technologies, they get better and cheaper all the time. I put my first solar panels up 25 years ago, back when they were expensive. But if I wasn't going to do it, who was? Those solar panels, which are still working fine, but if I took them down now, replaced them with newer, more efficient ones, the materials that are easily recoverable from those solar panels of 25 years ago, the silver, the things like that that are in them, are sufficient from one panel to make 6 or 7 panels now, just because we're getting so much better at making them. It goes beyond a kind of circular economy. It's a kind of Mobius strip of circularity. It's really quite astonishing once you start thinking about what a steep learning curve means technologically. The next generation of this stuff is just a couple of years off. I keep hearing now from people who say this long-awaited perovskite solar panels are actually coming now and soon, and with yet another increment of efficiency.
You know, Senator Ed Markey has a solar panel in his office on the Capitol, and it's huge. And he got it years ago when there was this sort of like clean energy demonstration on the Hill. And I think maybe it was like Exxon Solar or something hilarious like that. Maybe it was Chevron Solar had come and shown it back when they were pretending to do something about climate change, the fossil fuel companies. And they then threw it out in the garbage. And he fished it out of the garbage and hung it on his wall. And he loves to show. And now he puts facts on it all the time. And it shows how much solar has come down in cost, how much progress has been done. He gets his staff to update it. And he loves to say that like this huge panel that's on his wall, now the same amount of power would be, generated from just one little corner of a modern solar panel.
I can almost top that story. Some years ago, I went and found the panels that had been on the White House roof under Jimmy Carter. They were on the
found them? Where?
There's one in the Carter Library right here,
yes,
around the corner from
most of them ended up on the roof of a small college in rural Maine, a hippie institution called Unity College. So I went up there and they gave me one of them, and we took it with a couple of students to Washington, doing demonstrations every night along the way in Boston and New York and Baltimore to show that this thing was still working fine. And we tried to give it to the Obama administration to put back on the roof, but of course they were too scared by any association with Jimmy Carter, so they wouldn't take it. But it was quite remarkable to have this piece of technology still there. The sadness of all of this, of course, is that Jimmy Carter, in his last budget, had he been elected, had set aside enough money, they figured, to do the work to make sure that by the year 2000, America was producing a fifth of its energy from solar power. And had that happened, we would live on an entirely different planet now. Among other things, it would have meant that we would have had available and affordable renewable resources at the moment that China was taking its huge industrial leap. And so the temperature of the Earth would be substantially different from what it is now had Jimmy Carter won that election. And that should be a reminder to all of us to take none of this for granted. We've had other moments when it looked like we were going to be making this leap, and it's why we push, and it's why we organize, and so on.
Yes, that's why SunDay as an event and a network is so important, because the climate movement has been very good, or at least better, at fighting things, at saying no to fossil fuel infrastructure. And that's important and should continue, especially in overburdened communities, really on the front lines of pollution. But we also have to get better at saying yes to things, at saying, yeah, we want to speed up permitting. We want more things in our backyard, the sort of YIMBY, yes in my backyard movement. What is your vision for trying to get the movement to push in that direction, saying yes to EVs and solar panels and heat pumps and batteries and all these good things?
Well, Sunday is really my vision for how we start doing some of that. And then we just keep writing and pushing and talking about it over and over again. I think it will happen, Leah. I think that the climate movement, remember, grew up in those decades when fossil fuel was cheap and renewable energy was expensive. And that meant that by default, our job was to try and basically drive up the cost of fossil fuel, stop pipelines, divest from fossil fuel stocks, try to put carbon taxes on, all those things. It takes a little while to readjust to the world, the new world in which that's flipped. And we've been referring to renewable energy as alternative energy as long as I've been alive. Time to stop doing that. It's not alternative energy anymore. It's the obvious, common sense, straightforward way forward. And if we can make that case over and over again, it'll really help.
So I think our listeners, having heard this really quite remarkable conversation, they're going to want to get involved in SunDay. It's coming up in a few weeks. So, Bill, what can people do to get involved?
Start by going to SunDay.earth. It's a beautiful website. And one of the things you can do is contribute one of the many now tens of thousands of drawings of the sun that people have added to this gallery. But there you will find a map of all the events that are already scheduled to take place. If there's one in your community, then figure out how to join in. If there's not, then figure out how to make one. And it can be just small and beautiful. Get 50 kids and people from the neighborhood together on e-bikes with streamers coming out behind them. And that's the kind of beautiful thing that the local newspaper will cover and that will help add to the momentum of the day. This is the first attempt at this, and I think it's going to be quite lovely. I'm going to be in New York City for the end of the day, and Jane Fonda's coming to help. So we have lots of good souls joining in the fight, and we'll do what we can to make a joyful noise.
So this is like Earth, obviously a celestial body, right? Earth Day, celebrating the Earth. This is Sunday, celebrating the sun, right? And so what do you think the goal is coming out of this? If we can make this Sunday, the first of many Sundays to come, the most successful, what's your vision?
If people realize that this is not alternative energy, then it makes every step in the political process easier going forward. If we realize that this is at the heart of the energy future, then everything else gets much easier. And that's as important for progressives and environmentalists to recognize as anybody else. Because when I go around and tell people these statistics, when I tell them that China's putting up the equivalent of 3 coal-fired power plants a day worth of solar panels, environmentalists are just as likely to be amazed as anybody else by this. We've talked ourselves into the idea that this is alternative energy, and so we have to change our own minds a little bit here too. You know, the first Earth Day in 1970, which was the high water mark in some ways of political organizing in American history, 20 million Americans in the street, 10% of the then population. That drove political change in absolutely straightforward ways for the next decade. A corrupt Republican administration nonetheless gave us the EPA, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, whatever. It is an important step forward to make this part of the political dialogue everywhere. So that's what we're up to. And just in the same way that Earth Day 1970 was driven, above all, I think, by the images that came back from Apollo 8, those first pictures of the Earth as a whole. So this needs to be driven by a kind of image or a sense of the sun as the incredibly beautiful neighbor that it is. We're very lucky that our local star is as benign as she is, that she's at just the right distance to make our lives easy, and now easy in this way too. Hopefully, it'll be the start towards reorienting ourselves back towards the natural world in that way too.
Well, I hope that you're right. We got to get people excited about our movement and bring people along. And I'm just so excited to see what happens on September 21st.
Amen, friend. Thank you both very much. What fun to get to talk about all this and with such good souls as you.
We adore you, Bill. Thank you for, as ever, steering the compass of this work in such an important direction.
Back at you.
So I don't know, Leah. I was already excited about SunDay, but after talking to Bill, I'm like very fired up.
It's going to be a great event. It's coming up on Sunday, September 21st, just for clarity and confusion. The SunDay, Day of the Sun, will also be on the Sunday on the autumnal equinox when the day is just as long as the night. And it's happening really all across the country, right, Catherine? You can look up an event in your community going to SunDay.earth.
Yeah, it's really amazing to see just this like blossoming of things that are planned for the day. And of course, you can also plant your vision for SunDay in your community, add it to the website. You can design your own sun, which is very cool. Use that on social media, etc. And I think just in general, this feels to me like such a big invitation to shift some of our narratives, to shift some of our language and our framings. Bill really touched on at the end, breaking through the idea that solar power and wind power is alternative energy. It's not. It's just abundantly awesome energy. It is excellent. It is breathtaking. It is miraculous. It is cheaper than ever. It is growing faster than ever. It is cleaner than ever. And it's just going to keep making the world better. But it needs all of us to boost it along.
And in a time when the climate news can be so depressing, whether it's the endless wildfires or the endless Trump administration gutting of climate policy, it's easy to despair. And that's where I think SunDay will be such an injection of hope and optimism and really connection for people. If you take part in this event, you're going to meet some of your neighbors. Or if you've already got a heat pump or an EV or a solar panel or a battery, you can show that off and maybe inspire a couple people to go ahead and use those federal incentives before they expire at the end of the year. Activism is the antidote for despair, right? If you do something, if you get involved, you're going to feel less alone and you're going to feel more hopeful about this big, bright, solar-powered future that is really right on the horizon.
By Here Comes the Sun, we mean us.
In our next episode, we'll be talking to Dr. Kate Marvel, a good friend of Catherine and mine, about her new book. It's called Human Nature: 9 Ways to Feel About Our Changing Planet. And it's really a story of climate science and all the emotions that can come up as we look at the climate crisis. A Matter of Degrees is co-hosted by me, Dr. Leah Stokes.
And me, Dr. Catherine Wilkinson. We are a production made in partnership with the 2035 Initiative at UC Santa Barbara and the All We Can Save Project. Thanks to our funders and supporters who make this show possible, including the 11th Hour Project and Fossil Free Media.
Rose Wong designed our show art. Sean Marquand composed our theme song. Additional music came from Blue Dot Sessions and Epidemic Sound.
Script writing, fact-checking, communication, and production support are by Lucas Boyd, Quinn Lewis, Kristen Palmstrom, and Anusha Singh. Samir Sengupta is our editor and sound designer.
And if you're digging the show, please hop on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and give us a 5-star rating or leave us a review.
If you'd like to help us make more episodes of A Matter of Degrees, get in touch.
You can find us online at degreespod.com and on YouTube.
And stay tuned for more stories for the climate curious.